Week 3, you made it through week 2 unscathed, and hopefully everything went well with viewing the lectures and posting your attendance post for the week. And we're continuing to discuss listening, of course, but more specifically, we're looking at consequentiality, which really brings up the necessity and the motivation for doing listening research. And then we're going to look at how listening research is conducted this week. So, as we look at listening research, we really find that in communication studies, listening has been quite undervalued in terms of its importance and in terms of its skills. And also, listening has been under-researched. Now, when you get to look at how listening is undervalued in terms of a skill, when you compare it to other communicative skills like speaking, reading, and writing, listening, while it is learned first and it is used the most, it's on average used about 75% of our waking day, it is taught the least. And you can see this chart before you, that writing is taught the most, followed by reading, speaking, and listening. But when you reverse it, that's how we use it, and that's when we first learned it. So it becomes very interesting in terms of why we would promote and teach specific skills in the order and to the extent that we do. Now, obviously, when we break this down into listening, speaking, reading, and writing, it looks like each skill is completely separate from one another. But as we know about the dynamism of the communicative process, as we discussed last week, you really can't differentiate these skills too much from one another. There's a lot of overlapping. And for example, reading and listening have quite a bit of overlapping skills that are related to them. And so really differentiating them completely would be incorrect and inaccurate on our part. However, it is surprising that because we spent 75% of our waking day listening, that we aren't taught how to be better listeners. And what's really frustrating about that from my personal standpoint and from those that study listening standpoint is that listening is key to communicative effectiveness. And the reason why it's key to communicative effectiveness, I presented 4 reasons before you in the notes and on this PowerPoint slide, although there's more detail that we could go into. You begin first with communication as being co-construction. And so therefore, if communication is to be meaningful between the 2 or more individuals that are involved in that situation, then you have co-constructed meaning. And that means that there is at least equitable responsibility shared between both the speaker and the listener. And as we discussed before, especially in interactive situations, you can't differentiate between the speaker and listener because simultaneously you enact both roles. And so when we create this big divergence between speaker and listener as we study them and as we talk about the skills that they need, that really does a disservice to the listening process and how we understand it. Also, when you understand co-construction, you then place listening-centered communication at really the forefront because you understand how listeners will filter through messages, how they negotiate meanings with the other person, how it's a very relational perspective. Also, communication technologies, secondly, really emphasize how listening affects communication. And if you think about it, we have available to us a wide array of communication technologies, and many of you are enamored by whatever new phone comes out or whatever new software you can get on your computer to help you to communicate with other people. But just think about it. You can have a video, face-to-face, basically almost chat with somebody across the globe because of technology. And I can recall walking into my Chinese tutor's office one day on campus a couple years back, and she was talking to her mom in China who was about to go out and play tennis, and I walked in, I said hi, and obviously I couldn't speak very much Chinese, but I tried, and I was even able to meet her mother via an online chat and actually see what she looked like and see what her bedroom looked like that she was using for her computer station. So really and truly, our communication technologies are closing in on geographical distances and gaps that we have between those that we're communicating with, and also they're making us more accessible. And that means that we are in listening environments that aren't necessarily in face-to-face communication, which means that we have different listening environments than the other person that we're communicating with. And that means we have different distractions, we have different responsibilities within that environment. And so our contexts are very different, and it makes it very challenging to listen effectively. Also, the knowledge economy of today's world really affects our listening capabilities, and it affects the communicative process altogether. And the knowledge economy just basically is what's facing us in that we have access to such a great quantity of information. It's competing for our attention. We're having to decide exactly what we want to focus on, exactly what information is important, and what we're going to be able to remember and recall versus what we're going to throw out. And so the listening process, the knowledge economy really complicates that, because we have so many different messages that we're bombarded with on a regular basis. And we have to think about things like, okay, what information is going to make me more marketable in a future profession? What information is going to help me better navigate through my interpersonal friendships? And you have to make those sorts of decisions on the fly as well. And then fourthly, communication, and specifically listening, has consequences to it. And that's when we get into the consequentiality of communication. Consequentiality is what happens in our social interactions, and thinking about how it has consequences for those involved, how it influences ourselves, how we see ourselves, how we perceive ourselves, how we see others and perceive them, and how our identity is formed and how we perceive others' identities. Also, consequentiality looks at how our communication produces social structures and then reproduces those very structures, so rules, regulations, norms, and how we reproduce that, and how it even produces culture. Now, I think more practically we can think about it on a personal, professional, organizational, and societal level. Personally, you think about the consequences maybe of poor listening. Oh, so I didn't listen all that closely when my romantic partner was telling me about their day, and now they're asking me for some advice, and I don't really know what to say. They're going to realize that I didn't care enough to listen. How is that going to affect our relationship? Or maybe it's a family relationship that you have, and maybe your really effective listening skills have made you be known in that family as being warm and friendly and kind, and that has increased your social effectiveness within your family. On a professional level, I think about poor listening. What if your boss came to you one day and said, hey, you have a report due, and this is what you need to do, and this is how you need to do it, and maybe you were really distracted. Maybe you had some things going on in your personal life that were distracting you. Maybe there was a lot of noise in your external environment, and it was vying for your attention, and you didn't get everything you needed to do, and so you end up turning in an incomplete report. And it affects your job appraisal interview at the end of the year, and possibly affects a raise or maybe even continuance of that particular job. At an organizational level, it's estimated that just within the United States alone, that billions are lost per year in our businesses because of poor listening, because people have to repeat mundane tasks, because at times there's even harm that's done because of poor listening. In some organizational environments, it's very risky, and that if people don't listen effectively, there are safety concerns. And just think about it also in a democratic society, how important listening is, critical listening as you're evaluating messages from people like politicians and from the news media. And if you're not a critical listener, if you can't evaluate those messages effectively, how is it affecting things like voting? How is it affecting public opinion, and then how people then progress with making policy based on public opinion? Those are some really hefty concerns related to consequentiality and communication. They're just a few that I'm throwing out there. Obviously, there are a lot more that we're going to be thinking about through the course of this semester.